You kind of form an opinion after that. But don't just dismiss the lobbyists because they have lobbyists next to their name.
Do you see yourself running for further elective office?
I see myself trying to be the best at what I do now. And if that means I get to the point where I feel like I can be of service in another place, yeah, I'll do that. If I feel that I'm actually making a difference, I'll continue to go run for public office or run for another public office. But there'll be a day, I suspect there'll be a day when my wife and I will sit down and we'll say, you know what, this is just too draining on the family. Let's back off. We've got 4 kids now. It was really tough on my wife to be here for 4 months. She'll never say it was tough on her. She thoroughly enjoyed my service while I was up there. We communicated all the time. She loved to be involved as much as I loved being involved. She loved being involved. She felt like she was involved with me being up there. There were, I'm sure, days where it was tough being here with the 4 kids. But, my wife really enjoyed it. And so when we talked about it after the session was over, she said, we both, talked about my experience, and she asked me what my feelings were going forward, and I told her, and I said, what are your feelings? And she told me. And then I said, so what do you think? And we both agreed that I'm going to do it again. But I think these are decisions we have to keep making over and over again, because this involves the family, tremendously, actually. My son, you came in and asked, do you know what your dad does? I don't think my kids think about me being important. They just think of me as being dad. They do know what I do because we talk about it quite often. My daughter, Olivia, she'd go out and walk a lot with me. She loved walking. She loved talking to people. I couldn't keep her away from,
You mean campaigning, yeah.
Campaigning. She would go to a lot of events with me because she'd like to hand out flyers.
Speaking of campaigning, I noticed on your campaign website that one of the 3 things that you listed that you were going to try to work on was to improve the unemployment situation. What specific initiatives have you implemented to improve unemployment in Nevada?
Well, specifically, one of the laws that I did get passed, and I was approached by the Chiropractor Association. They came to me and said, look, one of the things we don't have in our state that almost every other state does is an internship program. Essentially, it's called a preceptorship, but an internship program where students coming out of a chiropractic college would then be assigned to go to the state of Nevada, work for a chiropractor, licensed chiropractor, and learn everything.
Kind of like student teaching.
It's student teaching under the direct supervision of a chiropractor, always supervised by a chiropractor, and learning the ropes. And what that does is it not only helps to educate that that new student and the new chiropractor, but then they come here and they see what the state of Nevada has to offer. Maybe they like the area, maybe they like the weather, who knows? But we're fostering of a climate where people will come and move. We're increasing the business community. If they open up a practice here, of course, then they have to hire people to work in their office and so forth. That's just one small thing, but I believe in the small things. But other things, when I went up there to learn a lot and to say no when it needed to be said and to say yes to certain things. I believe that in the end, when we pass that budget and we are spending $500 million less than we did the previous biennium, or when we remove the modified business tax for 70% of the small businesses here in Nevada, I think those are 2 positive steps that are going to help small businesses to expand into.
And that last one that you mentioned, you
modified business tax.
You extended the previously approved tax that was set to expire, but you relieved smaller businesses with below a certain income per quarter. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and basically what we're saying is, we're not going to tax you if you're going to grow your business. We're going to allow you to hire more people if it's going to expand. We want you to hire. And I think that was the most important thing right now is we need small businesses, which account, I believe, for 70% of hirings, to hire more people. And so I was excited that we were able to get that done. So I feel like that I contributed to that.
Please tell us about Family Supporting Adoption. Briefly.
Well, I'll be brief. It's basically a support group for those who go through adoption. My wife and I, we get involved from time to time. I'd like to be more involved. I like to say that I'm really involved in the organization. But we have, we've gone to a few of the meetings, but also we've taught, in some of their meetings, they had us teach one time on meeting birth parents. It's not always the case where adoptive parents get to meet the birth parents, and in our case, even more rare that we get to meet with the birth fathers. In very few of those cases, so we got involved, and we love talking to young couples who are about to adopt and explain our situation, what experiences that we went through, just so that they're more prepared. When we went through our first adoption, it seemed like we just couldn't ask enough questions and couldn't get enough answers. We loved to know what we were going to experience, what was going to happen. And so knowing and having that experience, we made ourselves available. What more do you want to know? Because we want to make sure you're totally comfortable that when something happens that first month after adoption, you're comfortable because you remembered that we talked about it, or you remember that we maybe shared a feeling on how we felt when the birth father said this or did that, that kind of thing. But family supporting adoption is.
And so you are not just a participant being supported; you also
give back.
Mentor other people.
Yeah, and we've done that. I mean, like I said, I like to be more involved in that. But I know myself. I try not to spread myself too thin because, again, my family comes first, and so I do give back to that organization because I really believe in it. But anything to do with adoption, and whenever there was legislation on adoption, I try to get involved in that as well. And going forward, there's still some things I think in the state that we can do that helps adoption to become even easier, and it protects the adoptive parents. I think that definitely there's a few things I don't know right now all the details on some of the things, but for example, in our situation in Alaska, that was the fastest we've ever adopted. The adoption is complete. It'd been, I think the baby was a month and a half and the adoption was completed.
Wow. That's like Texas and the death penalty.
Exactly. in a positive way. I'll tell you, I have found out that almost every aspect of adoption, everybody loves that. I mean, when you go to the court, that's the one thing that puts us.
They're all happy to see you. Sure,
face,
sure.
It's like, I get to do an adoption, good, because I get to see somebody's happy for a change.
Especially because if they're a family law judge, most of what they're doing is divorce and custody and all that.
Exactly, and now they get somebody who's actually smiling in court, from ear to ear usually, So that's the one part of their day that they enjoy.
What would be a good thing for them to do to start?
Yeah, it's not easy to start. I mean, you can just talk yourself out of anything, right? Like, oh, that might be too hard. I can't do that, or oh, I can't approach that person and ask them. So this is not an easy thing. I think the hardest thing to do, the easiest thing to do is to, where you see an opportunity, do it, and maybe even do it without anybody knowing you're doing it. I like to walk around, and if I see trash in somebody's yard, I like to pick it up. I carry a bag around with me from time to time when I'm walking with my kids or something like that, and I like to put the trash away. That's service. Nobody knows no one will ever know you did it, but it's actually the right thing to it's the right thing to do, and you're doing something for your community.
Great.
Nobody has to know. So I always try to find things like that where I can give service there.
Why would someone who has a good life, who's never been of service, maybe they're making a decent living, they're busy maybe they have a family, maybe they don't, but whatever, they're busy in their life, why would they want to take some of their time and resources away from themselves and or their family to give to others?
And I think this goes back to one of the things I said before. When you give service, there's a few things that happen, and in this case, the scenario that you've painted, it doesn't sound like the person is struggling with life or anything like that, but you do discover a little bit more about yourself. You discover things that you didn't know you could do. When you give service, again, it starts off slow, maybe, helping around the neighborhood, you pick up some trash or whatever, but then all of a sudden you hear about, they need some help at the bird sanctuary. There was a fire, and so they're going to be rebuilding some of the pens, and so you call them up and say, I'd like to help out, and then you realize, I didn't know I could do carpentry, or I didn't know I can, do these things. You just discover more about yourself when you give away your time, because that's the most valuable thing we have. is our time. You know, it's just amazing what you discover about yourself. But the other thing that I like about it is we all have what we perceive as complicated lives. You know, we're all busy. It seems like we're all busier than we were, you know, years ago. But when you slow down and you do things for other people, you realize your life isn't as complicated. And in some cases, some people think that their lives are ruined. Oh, you know, they're going through some difficulties. You kind of put in perspective who you are and what difficulties you were working through, right? And there, isn't that an old saying, you know, and I can't remember, and of course the thought just is fleeting and it's already left my mind, but you know, you think you're in a bad situation because you know, your foot hurts.
I thought I was bad off because I had no shoes until I met the man who had no feet.
That's it, right? My favorite story is about the man who's on, you know, in the subway in New York, and he's sitting there, and his 4 kids are, you know, with him. He sat down and got on the subway, and all the other people are watching because his kids are just out of control. They're just running around, and he just sits there and doesn't even say a thing. And the kids are screaming and touching and grabbing bags and just really being a nuisance. And finally, the lady says, you know, can't you control your kids, sir? And he finally looks up and says, oh, we just came from the funeral of their mother, and I just don't know how to react right now. All of a sudden, that lady's reaction is a little bit different. You know, we tend to think that we know what's going on in people's lives, and we tend to think that we know everything. But then all of a sudden, when we give back to people and we start doing things for them, and I'm sure that's the thought that went through that lady's mind, is what can I do to help out? Now all of a sudden we change, our mentality changes, our perspective changes. We're there to help you. When I just learned something about myself, I can be empathetic, you know, because maybe I've gone through that before and I know where you're going.
Right now I'm going to offer you a huge opportunity. On the other side of this camera is the entirety of humanity. Let's hope and pray they all see this video. All 6.7 billion of us. What would you say to us if we were all listening to you?
Oh, you know, I'd say the same thing that probably 5.5 billion of us think all the time, and that is, you know, what can we do to help somebody else's life a little easier, to be a little easier, to be a little bit more comfortable. And this life is short. This life is it's a twinkle in our eye, and a lot of the problems, the strifes of everyday living, and you know, they're really nothing. I think you have to put things in perspective. I just wish people would realize that kindness goes a long way. Kindness goes a long way. You know, don't be angry about something because it's going to be over with tomorrow. You know, my wife thinks that she thinks I stress about nothing. She goes, everything just flows off your back. You don't stress or worry about anything. And I think it's because I know tomorrow's a different day. I'll forget about, you know, all the bad stuff. You know, I served a mission for 2 years for my church, and there were some really horrible things that happened in those 2 years. Quite honestly, I can't remember what they are. I only remember the good things that happened, and that's human nature. I think we tend to remember the good things. How else would people be able to survive the Holocaust? I think if they now go back and they say, let's think about some of the bad things because we want to make sure it doesn't happen again. But to survive it, you think about nothing but the good stuff. And I wish people would treat that way. That just remember tomorrow's another day. Don't hold grudges. Don't be angry. Find a way to help somebody else out.
If I could give you any superpower, which would you select?
Invisibility.
What would you do with it?
Like I said, a lot of times when I render service, it's so that nobody else knows that it's happening.
Oh, so you could,
you know, that way you go about.
Be incognito.
You're anonymous. You're just, nobody knows. You know, to leave an invisible trail, whether it be financially sometimes, you know, when you help somebody out that way, I don't want anybody to know. I think that's the best way to render service.
Thank you very much for meeting with me and graciously giving your time to this effort. I hope it bears the fruit that we talked about.